The age of Göbekli Tepe, carbon-14 dating, happily places it in the area of between 9,500 BC.
High on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, stones older than writing stare back with carvings no one could truly read until now.
Is arguably the most important archaeological discovery in recent years. We're talking about a whole series.
An artificial intelligence trained on every groove and pattern at Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites has just decoded a hidden logic that ties animals to constellations, scenes to sky events, and rituals to cycles of catastrophe.
This was dressed with furs, and they were also painted. So you get the impression of this place.
If the machine is right, these pillars are not just art. They are a cosmic warning carved in stone. What exactly were our ancestors trying to tell us?
This is the oldest temple unearthed anywhere on this planet.
The site that rewrote the origin story. Before Göbekli Tepe, the story of civilization seemed neat.
So why is Göbekli Tepe so important? Well, one, it's 11,500 years old, if not older.
First came farming, then permanent villages, then temples and cities. The dig that began in the mid-1990s upended that timeline in a single season. Beneath a man-made hill emerged great circular enclosures ringed with T-shaped pillars, some 20 tons in weight.
Oversized monolithic pillars, weighing up to 20 tons and reaching heights of over 2 stories.
Each dressed with belts, hands and belts, each flanked by animals that looked less like ornaments and more like declarations. Radiocarbon dates pushed the whole complex back to the 12th millennium before the present, thousands of years before the first fields in Mesopotamia. The implication was astonishing. Hunter-gatherers, who supposedly lacked the surplus, hierarchy, and organization to build monuments, had built one of the most ambitious ritual landscapes on Earth. Walk the site, and the same elements repeat with deliberate rhythm. Twin central pillars stand in each enclosure, as if personified beings preside within the circle. Around them, foxes sprint, snakes coil, boars bristle, vultures spread their wings, scorpions brace to strike. These are not neutral masks of nature. Several are emphatically male, several are shown in aggressive postures, and several recur with near-obsessive consistency across different rings. Archaeologists argued over meaning for decades. Perhaps the animals were totems for clans. Perhaps they formed a bestiary for myths. Perhaps they were simply power symbols, chosen for their ferocity. Yet the repetitions would not loosen their grip. If the sculptors kept carving the same figures in the same relationships over centuries, then pattern was the point. Pillar 43, the famous vulture stone, concentrated the puzzle. A vulture raises something in its wing. A scorpion anchors the base. Other creatures crowd the field while, near the bottom, a headless human with an erect phallus bleeds meaning scholars could not agree upon. Some saw funerary rites. Some saw shamanic transformation. Some saw art for its own sake. Everyone ran into the same wall. With no text to translate, no bilingual key to lean on, and 1,000 subtle variations to juggle, human minds defaulted to familiar stories. What if the carvings were not a story in the way we expect at all? What if the language behind them was not about animals, but about positions, cycles, and sky?
There are such an incredible range of animals and birds and insects depicted at Göbekli Tepe, the like of which we have never seen.
The hill itself deepened the mystery. At the end of its life, the builders deliberately buried the enclosures, filling them with clean backfill, sealing pillars upright and carvings inward, as if turning the circles into a time capsule. People do not throw away monuments so carefully. They archive them. If the stones were meant to speak across ages, then the medium had to be durable, the code had to be repeatable, and the message had to be important enough to protect beneath tons of soil. What kind of message requires a monument this old to be entombed for the future? Teaching a machine to read stone. To escape the cul-de-sac of guesswork, researchers built a complete digital twin of the site. Teams scanned every pillar with structured light, stitched millions of points into sub-millimeter meshes, and draped photogrammetry over the geometry until the carvings were rendered with the fidelity of a fingerprint. LiDAR mapped the broader topography. Ground-penetrating radar traced buried rings and wall lines still sleeping beneath the mound. The archive grew to include sister sites across the region, most prominently Karahan Tepe, which mirrored the T-pillars and circles and added its own surprises, including a chamber lined with human heads carved from bedrock. Every animal, every symbol, every belt, every hand, every notch and cut mark went into a common index. The team did not ask the system for meanings. They trained it to identify relationships. Convolutional neural networks learned the silhouettes and internal features of each animal type, not as labels like fox or serpent, but as clusters of consistent geometry. Graph models recorded where each figure sat on each pillar, which way each figure faced, which figures tended to appear together, and which combinations never coexisted. Sequence models tracked how motifs migrated over time from one enclosure to the next. The result was not a single answer, but a statistical map of what the builders did on purpose and what they avoided. Then came the second layer. Astronomers provided parametric models of the night sky at Göbekli Tepe's latitude over a span of 13 millennia. The precession of the equinoxes slowly slides the backdrop of constellations behind the sun and moon. Bright stars rise and set at different azimuths across millennia.
We're actually seeing architecture in the Cygnus star system, just like what they paid homage to at Göbekli Tepe.
Lunar standstills, wax and wane. Those motions were converted into features an algorithm could compare with features on stone. Without telling the system that a scorpion might be Scorpio or that a vulture might encode a region of the sky, they let it search for stable correspondences between carved compositions and celestial configurations on specific dates. Patterns surfaced with breathtaking clarity. A fox carved in a certain stance and orientation kept aligning with the position of Sirius when particular enclosures were erected. A snake in a fixed pose matched the ecliptic path in seasons when the moon crossed that sector low to the horizon. A scorpion motif proved to map to the central body of Scorpio with such high confidence that the model treated it as an anchor in many rings, against which other figures snapped into place. The vulture stone stopped looking like a scene and began behaving like a diagram. The vulture's wing traced a swath of sky that matched a band of stars on a date around 12,800 years ago. The scorpion sat where Scorpio would have been. The headless human lined up with a position near the galactic center that, on that date, coincided with a radiant direction for a proposed comet stream. Skeptics pushed back right away, as they should. A powerful classifier can find coincidences in noisy data. The team answered with controls. They randomized pillar layouts and checked whether the sky fit still appeared. It evaporated. They swapped animal labels and watched the alignments collapse. They slid the date forward and back in centuries. The fit sharpened to a narrow window and then softened to nothing. The machine was not hallucinating on random fields. It was detecting a consistent code embedded in real compositions. If that code was real, then the builders were not carving animals for identity alone. They were installing a mnemonic system that fixed positions in the sky to bodies that their community knew by sight. If the hill was a library, then animals were the index tabs that led to celestial entries. If animals were entries, what did the book record beyond the simple positions of stars? Pillar 43 and the night the sky injured the Earth. Armed with the correspondence between motifs and constellations, researchers returned to Pillar 43 with a different kind of question. If this is a sky diagram, what sky does it show? The machine tried many skies and found one that fit without strain. Around the onset of the Younger Dryas, a sudden global cooling event roughly 12,800 years ago, the relative positions of the Scorpion, the Vulture's sweep, and the other figures on the slab lined up with visible constellations at specific azimuths for that latitude. The date range overlapped with geological signals that mark a period of upheaval in ice cores and sediments. The idea that a comet or swarm of fragments struck or airburst over parts of the northern hemisphere has been debated for years and remains controversial in details. The AI was not proving that debate. It was showing that the people at the hill anchored a record to a night sky that belonged to that crisis. The headless human suddenly carried double weight. Human decapitation in ritual contexts can represent transformation or passage, but in a sky code, it could also mark mortality at scale. The phallic emphasis could signal generation after destruction. The vulture, a scavenger and a psychopomp in many cultures, lifting an object in its wing could mark the ascent of souls or the path of debris through the sky. The scorpion anchoring the base could point to the constellation that set the coordinate system for the whole panel. Even the handbags that appear at the top of some compositions, long a magnet for speculation, aligned suspiciously with arcs where the sun and moon would track at key times. The machine did not call them bags. It treated them as glyphs, marking repeated curves. The burial of the site acquired chilling logic. If a group survives an event that resets coastlines, burns forests, and rearranges climates within a human lifetime, that group might imagine a future where memory is fragile. Oral tradition can carry warnings for centuries, but a monument that encodes cycles and dates can carry them for millennia. Bury it, and you keep it from being shattered. Align it to the sky, and you give the next readers a way to check the timing when the sky comes back around to the same geometry.
Is arguably the most important archaeological discovery in recent years. We're talking about a whole series.
None of this strips away the spiritual dimension. On the contrary, it enriches it. A ceremony performed inside a ring where pillars point to cosmic rhythms is not just spectacle. It is rehearsal, remembrance, and recalibration. The twin central pillars in each enclosure.
Stone is actually part of a massive, elaborately carved stone pillar. One in what turns out to be
human-shaped with belts and hands may have embodied ancestors or gods or mythic beings, but they also may have embodied the act of standing as humans between earth and sky, responsible for reading signs and passing them forward. If Pillar 43 truly stamps a date into stone.
So this is a fox. There's vultures here, there's bear, there's wild boar, and here...
Then Göbekli Tepe is not only the oldest temple, it is the oldest historical record. If it records a catastrophe, what else might the code be tracking that repeats on scales longer than a single human life? Cycles, warnings, and the terrifying possibility of intention. Once the eye had a dictionary of animal to sky relationships that held across multiple enclosures, it could test whether the stones referenced single events or a system of recurring cycles. The answer leaned towards cycles. In some rings, the placements match solstitial sunrises and sunsets for the era of construction.
In the shadows of the mountains of southern Turkey that humanity's first great construction project was born. The story of Göbekli Tepe
In others, the layout fits lunar standstill extremes that swing over an 18.6-year period. More striking are alignments that only make sense if precession is part of the code. A 26,000-year wobble that slowly shifts where the sun stands among the stars on the equinoxes. To capture a slice of that motion, the builders must have watched across generations and cared about celestial drift beyond seasonal needs. The machine also evaluated whether clustering of danger animals, like snakes and scorpions.
This was dressed with furs, and they were also painted. So you get the impression of this place.
Grew around compositions that correspond to dates associated with known meteor showers and hypothetical comet streams. It did, with significance that remained when controls scrambled the panels. That does not prove that a specific radiant produced devastation at a specific year. It suggests that the code links certain celestial configurations to elevated risk. In other words, this was a calendar not only of planting and hunting, but of vigilance.
What the vulture stone is actually a calendar.
But it is not a calendar pointing to the end of the world.
The most unsettling implication is not that the world once suffered a sudden cold shock or flood.
Göbekli Tepe could be the smoking gun of a lost civilization.
It is that a group 12,000 years ago believed the future would need the past more than the present did. They built a machine in stone to measure when the sky repeats a posture they feared. They sealed that machine and hid it for us. Modern minds often imagine the prehistoric as innocent of abstraction. The hill insists otherwise. Its logic is not random.
And there's no way to tell how big it is. From where you're standing, it's like a mountain made of fire.
It is systematic. Its art is not casual. It is instructional. The burial reads as an act of care. The inward-facing carvings preserve detail from weather and vandalism. The clean fill keeps foundations upright. The mound that results masks the rings from enemies and casual quarrying. If a community sacrificed so much labor to both build and bury the truth they had learned, then they believed two things. One, that the lesson would matter long after they were gone. Two, that the only reader who could decode it would be someone with time, patience, and a sky above their heads. AI gave us the first of those tools. We still keep the second. If the code points to cycles, and if some cycles bring danger, are we willing to look up with the same seriousness they did? Sister hills, shared codes, and a civilization of watchers. Göbekli Tepe is no longer alone. Karahan, Tepe, Cyberch, Sefertepe, and other stone hills in the same cultural zone reveal the same grammar. T-pillars stand in circles. Hands and belts return. Snakes and foxes and vultures move through the compositions like a chorus, repeating a refrain in new keys. Karahan Tepe adds features that sharpen the picture. A subterranean room with a dozen human heads carved from the bedrock confronts the visitor with a gallery of faces that may represent ancestors, shamans, or a chorus of witnesses. A pillar, dominated by a snake, echoes the serpents that twist through Göbekli's rings. A vulture motif nods toward the vulture stone. When the AI trained on Göbekli's dictionary scanned Karahan's carvings, it found the same alignments to the sky, with local variations that reflect slightly different build dates and orientations. This duplication across multiple sites matters. It implies a shared curriculum, not a one-off experiment. Groups separated by valleys and ridges borrowed the same code and tuned it to their own circles. That is how a discipline spreads. It also hints at a network capable of coordinating labor across a landscape. Even without farms, people can gather seasonally in large numbers if the occasion merits it. The hill circles look like such occasions. Feasting debris, butchered animal bones, and traces of craft clustered near the enclosures suggest gatherings with purpose, not random crowds. The network also solves a practical problem. A single site can fail, be conquered, or be forgotten. Many sites carrying the same message increase the odds of transmission across centuries. The deliberate backfilling seen at Göbekli Tepe appears in different forms at other hills, as if the culture adopted preservation as part of the ritual cycle. Build a ring, use it for a time, seal it, and move to the next. In that rhythm lies a philosophy of time, different from ours. Completion does not mean abandonment. It means storage. Outside Turkey, the AI flagged resonances rather than one-to-one matches. The pyramids in Egypt align with stellar targets at their era in ways many argue are intentional. Mesoamerican temples embed solstices and equinoxes in stair shadows and sightlines. Stone circles in Britain frame lunar extremes with astonishing accuracy. These traditions, separated by oceans and millennia, may not share direct contact, but they share a habit of watching, measuring, and building meaning into alignments. The pattern raises a hard question that our own era seldom asks. If many cultures independently encoded sky knowledge in stone, not for decoration, but for memory, then what did they all consider important enough to preserve beyond myth? What the machine tells us about us. Artificial intelligence did not make Göbekli Tepe meaningful. People did that 12,000 years ago by carving data into pillars and sealing them for strangers. What the machine has done is strip away some of our biases. Humans tend to read stories into scenes because we are storytellers. We tend to see animals as characters because we grew up with myths. A model that cares only about geometry, frequency, co-occurrence, and fit can remind us that a fox may be a star, and a vulture may be an arc in the sky. That does not reduce the spiritual dimension. It reveals that spirituality and measurement were not enemies at the origin of culture. They were partners. The terrifying part of the decoding is not the comet theory itself. Scientists will continue to argue over proxies and cores and craters. The terrifying part is the possibility that a pre-literate culture tried to warn us about cycles that exceed the attention span of states and markets. Our species is brilliant at solving urgent problems and forgetful when asked to prepare for slow, rare, but devastating ones. The hill cuts across that flaw. It says, learn the rhythms of heaven, because sometimes heaven turns on you, and you will want to know when. It says, bury the lesson, because the next storm may erase your classrooms, but not your stones. It says, gather your neighbors, because nobody survives the big turns alone. We should not romanticize. Those builders were not superhumans. They were people who loved their children, quarreled with rivals, and bled fingers lifting rock after rock. They also had the discipline to translate the sky into a code their descendants might read. If an algorithm can now help pass the code, then we owe the ancients more than wonder. We owe them the effort to test their warnings, to cross-check with modern astronomy, and to build our own archives that might outlast us. The next steps are clear. Train models on every stone hill, expand the dictionary of motifs with caution and rigor, tie codes to dates with error bars, not certainties. Compare the cycles the stones point to with the cycles we measure today. Watch the sky with large-scale surveys that never sleep, and write plans that assume improbable events still happen on geologic schedules. The machine has not made the past simple. It has made our responsibility to the future plain. If a time capsule opens on a hill and the message reads, "Look up," what do we do with that command? Göbekli Tepe was never just a circle of stones. It is a library, a calendar, and a warning written by people who refused to let memory die. AI did not make the message. It helped us hear it. Do you think the builders consciously encoded a cosmic timetable? Or did our pattern-hunting machines overfit the stars to our fears? Tell me which side you land on, and what you would build now to preserve our own hard-won knowledge for whoever comes after. Like the video if this changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe for the next decode from Karahan Tepe and beyond, and share this with someone who believes prehistory was simple. The stones suggest it never was.